Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today I am going to read Hornbill Chapter 2 We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together by Gordon Cook and Alan East. So let's start. Is July 7, 1976. My wife Mary, son Jonathan 6, daughter Susan 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England to duplicate the round-the-world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, had dreamed of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer, and for the past 16 years we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. Our boat, Wavewalker, a 23-meter 30-ton wooden hull beauty, had been professionally built, and we had spent months filling it out and testing it in the roughest weather we could find. The first leg of our planned 3-year, 105,000 kilometers journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of the Africa to Cape Town. There, before heading east, we took on two crewmen, American Larry Wiesel and Swiss Herb Silgier, to help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. On our second day out of the Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales for the next few weeks. They blew continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming, up to 15 meters as high as our main mast. December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday, complete with a Christmas tree. New Year's Eve day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon, and it did soon for the worse. At dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with only a small storm jib and were still making 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless, enormous seas rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm ship and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stream. Then we double-lashed everything, went through our life red drill, attached lifelessness, donned oilskins and life jackets, and waited. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. With an ominous silence, the wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. Then came a groaning roar, and an enormous cloud twirled of the ship with honor. I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I had ever seen. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of the other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. The roar increased to a thunder as the stream moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might ride over it, but then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. I accepted my approaching death, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. Unexpectedly, my head popped out of the water a few meters away. Wavewalker was near capsizing, her mast almost horizontal. Then a wave hurled her upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I gave the guardrails and sailed through the air onto Wave Walker's main boom. Subsequent wave tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow, I found the wheel lined up the stern for the next waves and hung on. Water, water everywhere. I could feel that the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Suddenly, the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. "We are sinking," she screamed. "The decks are smashed. We are full of water. Take the wheel," I shouted as I scrambled the hatch. Larry and Herb were pumping like madmen. Broken timbers hung at crazy angles. The whole starboard side bulged inwards. Clothes, crockery, charts, things, and toys lost about in deep water. I half swam, half crawled into the children's cabin. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yes," they answered from the upper bunk. "But my head hurts a bit," said Sue, pointing to the big bump above her eyes. I had no time to worry about bumped heads. After finding a hammer, screws, and canvas, I struggled back on deck with the starboard side bashed open. We were talking water with each wave that broke over us. If I couldn't make some repairs, we would surely sink. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. More problems arose when our hand pumps started to block up, with the debris floating around the cabins and the electric pump short-circuited. The water level rose threateningly. Back on deck, I found that our two spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard, along with the forestaysail, the jib, the dinghies, and the main author. Then I remembered we had another electric pump under the chart room floor. I connected it to the out pipe and was thankful to find that it worked. The night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, steering, and working the radio. We were getting no replies to our Meriday's calls, which was not surprising in this remote corner of the world. Sue had swollen alarmingly. She had two enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she hadn't made more of her injuries before this, she replied, "I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all." So that's all for today. Tomorrow I am going to complete part 2. So thank you very much for watching and listening. Bye.